So we started with Jacob last week and just had a ladder set up. And the question we had for us last week was not what's at the top of the ladder of your life, the ladder of success, the ladder of climbing the social ladder, but who is at the top, of your ladder. Because who is at the top of your ladder truly changes everything. Something marvelous happens when it's not a what, that's a goal that's at the top of your ladder, but a who. For Jacob, his life was changed. He had a birthright from his father. But here, he had a birthright that changed his whole life and his whole sense of identity. Not something given by his human father, but a more powerful, profound, larger purpose given to him by God. He no longer was running from something after this experience. As you continue to read the text, he begins to move towards something of deeper and richer meaning. Not because he had a what at the top of his ladder, but a who. Peter Collins, the author of Good to Great, calls them bags. B-H-A-G. Big, hairy, audacious goals. Michael Slaughter changes that and he says, what God gives us is big, hairy, audacious God purposes. That God's plan for us is bigger than our day job, bigger than our trip to the store. It's a big, hairy, audacious dream. They're God-sized dreams. They're given to each of us by God. They're burning bushes that attract our attention by the side of the road. They call us, they stir our hearts, they get our attention, and they begin to stir up within us a possibility for our community, for our family, for our world, for our church. Something different, richer, deeper, and better. Do you have a big, hairy, audacious dream for your family, for this community, for the world in which we live? Or are we finding ourselves just as spectators and audience in a rich, life-giving drama that God is inviting us to be a part of? The power of a bag, a big, hairy, audacious God purpose, or what I call a bad, like, that's bad, man. A big, hairy, audacious dream given by God, is that instead of moving us away for something, it is God inviting you and me into something bigger and richer and deeper and richer. Was it about 10 days ago or maybe in a week ago that there was that meth lab bust in the city? How many of you remember that, are aware of that? I remember looking at the Facebook pages and seeing people's comments about that bust. So many of them were like, I'm out of here. I'm ready to go. I hate this place. I want to set up a new life somewhere else. And while I understand the emotional response to that, here was my question. Is God calling us to run away from the needs of our communities and our neighborhoods? Or is God calling us to be the people of Christ, moving towards those places of deepest and greatest needs? That's a big, hairy, audacious dream. When we feel God calling us towards a place of need instead of away. Now, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about these dreams. We're going to talk about what it is to have a big, audacious, hairy dream. We're going to look at the experience of Moses as he was given a dream and how big, hairy, audacious dreams can come to us and what questions you and I need to be asking as we open our hearts to God's dream working inside of us. But before we do, I want to point out something about Jacob's dream that often, and I want to use the terminology of glass ceilings. Have you heard of that? It's mostly came out of the study of women in corporate culture. That often women in corporate culture hit glass ceilings. That they can see the top. They can see the possibility of being a CEO because of the nature of corporate culture, because of the nature of ambition and attitudes in corporate culture. They can see the possibilities for advancement as CEOs, but the reality is they always hit what they call, in most cases, a glass ceiling. Now that is not just true for women. It's also true for any of us who find ourselves in jobs or positions where we see the possibility of advancement. But because of attitudes or other ambitions or the culture of the company or facility in which we work, that often it becomes a glass ceiling instead of an open window to opportunity and advancement. Those kind of glass ceilings are possible for all of us. And when we think about living into a glass-sized dream, I wonder if you and I can relate to some of the glass ceilings that we either find placed upon us or discover growing within us. What I call the butts of our dream. Remember Jacob? He got that great dream and he realized God was with him. And I think he was still a little bit afraid, actually. The Bible that we read this morning said he was afraid. And then he's ready to kind of give himself over to this vision, this dream, right? But what does he say? Doesn't he qualify his response? He says, if you do this, if I am safe, if everything turns out all right, then I will give myself to you. Already, he has entered into this response to God's big, hairy, audacious dream in his life with a personally imposed glass ceiling. How about you? What are the buts? Yes, God, but that are the glass ceilings in your life. Let me suggest 4 of them. They're actually listed on our ladder right there. One is the but of later. You know, I'll serve you, God, but it'll be later. I've got a career to grow. I've got a family. I've got a lot to do. My work hours are really crimping my capacity to serve. I'll get to it, God, but it's going to have to be later. I want a deeper prayer life. Right now, I got to get my kids to school. I got to transport my kids to dance. Work is a bear. I'll have time, God. Boy, I can't wait till I retire because I'll have all the time in the world to serve you, God. And yet, what is the comment I hear the most from people who retire? I'm busier now than I was when I was working. It's like the but of later is God is in your galaxy and you can see the light, and every once in a while you faintly fill the pool of the awe, but He's not in your solar system. And it doesn't affect you. Because later, here's how I hear it often in a way that always mystifies me. I'm going to wait till my children get older to introduce them to faith and religion. Like somehow developing a life of maturity, of joy, of hope, of eternity and time transforming the human heart is not dependent on the foundations we grow from the beginning. None of us would say, I'm going to wait till my children are old enough to take algebra and geometry before I'm going to introduce them to mathematics. And yet somehow we think, I can wait, without realizing the foundations for their life shape later begins in the choices and decisions we make as people, as families, and as a community today. There's the but of not yet, as in, it's not quite time, God. Not yet. And it's related to the but of later, but it's kind of like God is in your solar system now. And He has this gravitational pull on you. And every once in a while God comes really close and really kind of stirs you up like waves from the pull of the moon. And He touches you and affects you. And He's actually in your top 5 goals now. But it just seems like not yet God never leaves number 5. You want to move them up to 1 or 2, but then you got the bills to pay, and you've got events to go to, and you've got responsibilities to take care of. And instead of God in move as number 1 or 2, and hopefully number 1 in your life, God stays at number 5. And it's less about what is most important to God in your life and more about God, bless what I have going on in my life. You are in the top 5. And then there's the buts of attitude, the but of can't. Here's one of those, which is you can't. Those exterior voices of authority or parenting or peers or community that begins to say to you, you can't. You aren't smart enough. You aren't old enough. You're not gifted enough. You're too old. Or just plain, you can't do that. And it's usually a voice of authority outside of you that sets a tape off in front of you that records it and keeps playing over and over and over. And we hit this ceiling of immobility. Sometimes you begin to peer around that ceiling and begin to climb the ladder of what is possible in an intimate relationship with God lived out every day in devotion and service and mercy and forgiveness. And people start to see you changing. And so those outside voices no longer are the voices inside of you. It's the voice of God calling you to life and purpose. But those outside voices still will say, you can't. Because you're changing. And they're not. And the you can't becomes a way to bring you back down to where it used to be. Another voice of can't is a voice that says, I can't. When you've internalized those messages to the point where you doubt even your own ability. And God gives you an invitation, invites you out of your comfort zone. It says, would you lead a small group? Me? I can't. I don't know the Bible. And the last but is the but that says, not me, God. It must be someone else. How many of you have found yourself saying that? I'm not qualified. I don't know enough. Not me, God. I wonder if that's what Jacob felt as he felt this call on God's life. And he began to consider the possibilities and then became radically aware that God was talking to him. And out of that not quite me reality, Jacob says, oh, I'll do it if you provide. I'll do it if I know I'll be safe. I'll do it if I know first that you'll get me there. How many of us find ourselves saying, not me, because we don't believe we are qualified? What is that saying? God doesn't call the qualified, God qualifies the called. And that maybe God is inviting you and I to grow into a ministry. Eugene Peterson, who's the one that writes that paraphrase of the Bible called The Message, said that maybe that's the point. He says, salvation is God's work. Jesus saves. He says, incompetence may be the essential qualification for following God, lest we impatiently and presumptuously take over the business and start trying to manage a vast and intricate economy that we have no way of comprehending. maybe nothing qualified is the best step for being shaped by the hand and invitation of God. Rick Warren was invited to be on the Oprah show for one of her programs called Life Class, and he told Oprah, he said he'd be glad to appear on the show, but he had one request, that he wanted to bring a friend with him. And so he brought a friend by the name of Nick Vujicic, a guy who should cause all of us to think, to pause when we think we're not qualified or able. See, Nick was born in Melbourne, Australia in 1982 without arms or without legs, the result of a congenital disorder. He had a tough time as a child, often experiencing discrimination and bullying, until it reached a point where at age 10 he tried to kill himself. But he survived, and then he grew closer to God as a teen and realized that he wasn't the only person in the world with severe disabilities. And with that realization, he learned to embrace his lack of limbs in order to inspire others. And even though he has no legs, and he has just 2 small feet, one of which has only 2 toes, using what he has been given, he learned to type on a computer and to take care of himself, to golf, to swim, to skydive. As an evangelist, motivational speaker, and founder of a non-profit organization called Life Without Limbs, he is living out his big, hairy, audacious, God-given dream to inspire others and draw us closer to God. What's holding you back? Is it something from within? That's your glass ceiling? Romans chapter 12, verse 2, Paul writes, "Do not conform yourselves to the standards of this world, but let God transform you inwardly by a complete change of your mind. Then you will be able to know the will of God and what is good and pleasing to Him and perfect." Invite God's dream to grow inside of you. We're going to talk about living into that, how we do that, what are the questions to ask, what are the things we need to do in response to that dream over the next 2 weeks. But today, let your mind be renewed. Move away from the can'ts and let God's Holy Spirit begin to bubble up inside of you a God-sized dream for this community, for this region, and for this world. All God's people said.